Good morning, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to the 244th weekly webinar series organized by AABN. Your continued support makes me proud to serve as your convener and fills me with optimism about the future of AABN. As we move forward, our commitment remains strong to invest in the vast potential that lies in collaboration among individuals of diverse backgrounds, perspectives, and expertise. I sincerely thank each of you for keeping AABN close to your lives and for your ongoing encouragement. At the outset, I owe each of you a heartfelt thank you for logging in today. I assure you that the next 1 hour will be a rewarding experience full of meaningful insights and useful takeaways. And I say this with confidence because we have with us an iconic speaker who will address the topic global economic shifts amid the Russia Ukraine war, impacts on India and the world. It's my honor to introduce Professor Dr. Parivelan K.M., Associate Dean and Professor at the School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, Uksan University, Hyderabad. Professor Parivelan holds his master's and doctoral degrees from the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. His illustrious career includes teaching at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, and serving with the United Nations Development Programme in post-tsunami recovery efforts in India, as well as with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees during the voluntary repatriation of Sri Lankan Tamil refugees. His academic and professional interests span refugee protection, statelessness, international relations, forced migration, access to justice, human rights, humanitarian issues, climate change, and disaster management. He has guided doctoral scholars and taught courses such as Law and Justice in a Globalizing World, International Humanitarian and Human Rights Laws, Disaster and Development, and Foreign Policy. Professor Parivelan established a Center for Statelessness and Refugee Studies at TIS in collaboration with UNHCR, and he remains affiliated with the Mahadirban Calcutta Research Group. He is also a member of the Statelessness Journal, Melbourne University, serves on several academic boards, and contributes widely through publications. Currently, he is a member of the Advisory Committee for the Welfare of Sri Lankan Tamil Refugees, constituted by the Government of Tamil Nadu, and a member of the Journal Committee of the Sardar Patel National Police Academy, Government of India. He also serves as a visiting professor at Karl van Ossietzky University of Oldenburg, Germany, for the European Masters in Michigan, for the for the European Master in Migration and Intercultural Relations, supported by the European Union. Friends, we are indeed privileged to have Professor Dr. Parivelan with us today. Let us warmly welcome him and look forward to his insights on this critical global issue. A line of appreciation to Mr. Suresh Marisalam for his continued support and cooperation. Thank you, and over to you, Dr. Parivelan.
Thank you. Thank you all. At the outset, my greetings to all who are part of this very forum, Annamalai Alumni Business Network. Indeed, I should record my, surprise as well as my sincere appreciations for this network to hold regular meetings on every weekend, that is Sunday, from diverse locations, diverse, field of work. You are interested in the common thing to, discuss dialogue and deliberate issues. That's something fantastic. I salute it. It's really great, and I feel it's an honor and privilege to join this forum today and have a conversation, I should say, because everyone is aware about what is happening in the Russia-Ukraine war. I'm just going to do some adding some perspectives to it and have a conversation. With this thing, I would also like to record my sincere thanks to my former colleague and a good friend, Mr. Suresh Marisalam, who has been a bridge to connect us into this forum. I thank him as well. Greetings to all. Mr. Gopi, who had kind of got in touch with me in the last few days and mooted this thing. All right. So, what are we going to discuss? The Russia-Ukraine war and its impact on the global economy or on the global peace on the global diplomacy. I'll just break down this into three or four segments broadly. I would like to, one, present the geopolitical aspects of this very Russia-Ukraine war. How are we revisiting the very geopolitics when we were assuming that we moved from the World War I, World War II to a world of peace, where we were thinking that we are entering an era of more of geoeconomics and geoculture. That's an assumption. And that's why we moved in, particularly by 89, 91, when the Berlin Wall collapsed, when the Soviet Union itself collapsed. There was an assumption that there is no more East-West kind of ideological confrontation. Now, what Francis Fukuyama, in his famous work, The End of History and the Last Man, called it that the ideological wars for so long have ended and we are entering into a new peaceful world order. That was the expectation we had, that we are entering a new world order. But now the developments in the last 2 or 3 years has made us to revisit the very geopolitical games being played by the bigger powers. And that's something we need to take note of. As we talk about the Russia-Ukraine war, I would also like to connect that we live in a VUCA world, VUCA, VUCA world. The VUCA constitutes a volatile, V for volatile, U for uncertain, C for chaotic, and A for anarchical world. So let's note that we are in a VUCA world order where there have been tremendous changes to the way we conduct the rule of law. The rule-based world order is suddenly seemingly collapsing and everyone wanting to take their own unilateral stand. This very VUCA world, which we look at, emerges not just from the recent wars, but also from the time we are looking in the last 1 or 2 decades about the impact of climate. The climate is trying to shake the very notion of what we call what kind of development. And that's something triggering us to make us think, are we going towards a sustainable world order, or are we going towards something very destructive world vis-a-vis the climate? So climate was a very big challenge, which is there for quite some time. In the last 4 or 5 years, we all know about the pandemic. The COVID pandemic came and disrupted the world system, the supply chain, and the sovereignty of nations. Everything it put into question, where we all were looking for the vaccine, and the vaccine is the only way we need to come out. And we wouldn't know even today how this COVID pandemic came about, how it shook the world for almost 1.5 2 years, and then we were just trying to come out of it. It is in this context that the February of 2022 you have Russia makes the interruption or disruption by engaging with Ukraine. Not so surprising, but there's a lot of time it was building up, and then Russia engages with Ukraine, called as the Russian intervention into sovereign Ukraine. And therefore, it is a context that we are going to discuss. So this is not something which happened all of a sudden. It's not something Russia gets in. But as I'm going to talk a little more about the background and the sequence and what kind of impact it has on the polity, global polity, on the global economy, on the global peace, few things I'll structure and bring in. As I come in, I want to also place, right away as we discuss the VUCA world, the volatile, uncertain, anarchical world, which we are trying to see. It's not so seemingly orderly as we speak. You have a very fragile United Nations, which I had forced to work for some time. But the very United Nations is just alarmed. A couple of days back, the UN Secretary General has said that UN is facing a tremendous financial crisis. Unless the member states come forward, the UN will collapse. So United Nations is something we look at as a world body, and we want to see if it can do something about it. I know a lot of people are very skeptical of the UN, saying that why doesn't UN solve the world problem? The UN cannot solve the world problem. It is we as nation states, as a part of the member states, that we need to look and see how we can solve the problem. So solving the problem is not just about UN as a body. It is in itself a multilateral. It's in itself an intergovernmental body, and it is we, the member states, we are part of it, have to do something about it. So the way it is collapsing and the way it is struggling today, even with the financial crisis, is something we need to take note of. What kind of a world order we are in? That is, I think, something we can look at from half glass full or half glass empty of how UN functions. We know that UN has its own limitations because of the power politics. So as we speak it, I would like to place the power politics being played, geopolitics being played, and what is this power politics, or the power as it is defined as an ability to influence others and control them. And today that's how we see a measure how countries are powerful. Our friend here, Dr. Vivek, was talking about realism some time back. So realism is one of the theories which talks about how does a nation state survive, how does it try to increase its power and wants to expand. It could be geographical expansion, it could be diplomatic influence, it could be the way they would like to control. So that influence is something where it talks in a very hardcore way that you need to seek power for your own survival, for your own growth. And this school talks about increase in power. This is like, you can attribute to Hans Morgenthau, you can attribute this idea to Thomas Hobbes, but we can also recall our own Indian thinker about 2 millennium earlier named the Kautilya, the Chanakya or Kautilya. His Arthasastra in itself talked about this statecraft and realism actually. How do you take care of yourself by looking at your neighbors? You can't assume that everybody is peaceful around you. So that's realism in one way. In contrast to realism, we have another theoretical model which is called liberalism. It believes in peaceful world order. You want to, assume that everybody is there to cooperate. I think it is these two ideologies is where somewhere India wanted to, I think, look at in a very blended way. We did not look much about realism. We were thinking more of an idealism. That's why we started it actually in the post-independence India. We started with a lot of idealism around us. And that's where we were starting with even something called the non-aligned movement we all are aware of. The non-aligned movement, the NAM, started by our first Prime Minister Nehru as part of the coalition with other leaders from Yugoslavia, from Egypt, from Indonesia and other countries. They provided a picture that we as decolonized countries from Latin America, Asia, Africa cannot go back to the power politics again. And the time we had the post-World War II assumed that it was going to be a peaceful world order, but it entered into a kind of a bipolar politics led by United States of America at one side, the former Soviet Union on the other end, and they were ideologically confronting the capitalism versus the socialism or communism. It is that we wanted to keep away. And then we said that we neither want to be too much into realism nor into, but little more on the idealism. That's why we started the non-aligned movement. But I want to link later on when we talk about the impact of this current war on India. I would say that we have moved away from the non-alignment to something today called as a quote unquote multi-alignment. A very important shift in our policy that we have become multi-aligned. And it is that multi-aligned policy which we have in itself puts us into trouble. Somebody thinks that we have to be only with the US. Somebody thinks that we have to be only with Russia. Somebody thinks we have to be only with Europe. Not so possible. India wants to engage. That's what we are trying to give a message to the world, that we want to be multi-aligned today. I'll come to that a little later. So there is a realism, there is an idealism. That's what the world, we were divided into. But today we have a kind of a hardcore realism. The idealism made us believe as a part of economics. The emphasis is on the economy. How do you build your economy? How do you do production? How do you do trade with others is what we are thinking. And we are assuming that there are institutions working towards making the world open. And we call that as an era of globalization in the last 2 or 3 decades, particularly from an Indian perspective, that post 1991, we were moving into a globalized world order. And we're thinking it is rule-based. But today we are also confronted with what we call it as the tariff war. The United States pushing us into 25 plus 25, kind of a tariff shook us actually, that how can a very friendly, strategic partner could push us into that kind of a situation. So that we will come again a bit later on looking at how there are shifts happening because of this very Russia-Ukraine war, you don't have any consistency, you don't have any kind of continuity, but rather a lot of disruptions and disorder coming in. So tariff in itself, what the European Union representatives were coming to India, Ms. Ursula and the European Union President, were rightfully commenting that tariffs are today used as a weapon. So that's something, again, shaking the very framework of geoeconomics. And that's where we are again made to rethink about the geopolitics. That is it something, the geography, the politics, the dynamics is going to shake us up. So that's something that we need to take into context. I'm just providing a brief, a small theoretical framework on how we could look at, say, realism, the idealism, and sometimes it could be neorealism, it could be neoliberalism. And these things, as they are, we wanted to choose our own pathway from India. We wanted to see a peaceful world order. Even today, we believe that as a part of Global South, underline it, I'll come back to this again, as a part of Global South, we would like to see how the developing and underdeveloped countries need to have some space in the global arena. And India wants to be one of the leaders, representatives in that endeavor. And therefore, how we would like to visualize a world which will be rule-based. When it is getting shaken, we get worried more about it. That what kind of a world order we wanted to represent, wanted to see, how do we see a global north, global south, in terms of open opportunities for all, to look at an inclusive world, equitable world, and also to see a democratic world order. So therefore, there is also concern whether we want to be part of a unipolar power-dominated world order, the way United States wants to visualize itself as the only leader, or we wanted to see a multiple world order where there could be multiple leaders, multiple power centers, and there could be power distribution where India could also be there and represent the global south. So the whole scenario, what is emerging from the Russia-Ukraine war, I'm just trying to fit in a few things here, to say that we are into a very uncertain, chaotic, anarchical world order is a concern for the entire globe and more concern for the global south. That's something I wanted to pitch in the end of a message, that it is not just about a war where you see in the theater of Eurasia, where Russia has a domination, Ukraine is an aspiring Western aligned country. Is that so or something else? We will come to that. So Russia-Ukraine war has significantly impacted the global order, peace, the global economy as well. The economy where there is a huge, huge impact on the energy and food security. It had triggered higher inflation, disrupted the supply chains for critical commodities, the food grains, the minerals, the metals. There's a slow global growth attributing to this very war. But as I was telling, one more point I want to add, as we are talking about Russia-Ukraine war, you can't talk that in isolation. We need to also speak about what America is doing. What United States as of now is trying to send a message in their so-called the Western Hemisphere, the domination. They are trying to give a message that what they have done in Venezuela, to go into a sovereign country, arrest the leader and remove the leader and put into some kind of a charges, and then they are also trying to do disruption, and that is also geopolitics involved. I'll come to that again a bit later. So United States intervention in Ukraine is an added element in the recent times. You also have the Chinese trying to give a message to Taiwan. For quite some time, they've been surrounding, not just in South China Sea, but they're also trying to give a message to Taiwan at this juncture. So you have different power leaders that trying to use their power structures, and they're trying to give some kind of a message. Is also a context we needed to bring in 2 or 3 events, not just about Russia, Ukraine in isolation. I wanted to speak, but how these all are going to disrupt the supply chain. They're going to disrupt the trade. They're going to disrupt the world order. Is something a matter of concern for us, where there's a reduced gross domestic product situation here. Almost it has been calculated that on an average it's 1 to 1.5 trillion dollars that we are going to lose every year on an annual basis. There's going to be increased poverty. Countries which are struggling with already pre-existing hierarchies, challenges in their social and economic structures are going to now have more poverty. There are going to be trade disruptions. There are going to be a heightened uncertainty across all sectors of manufacturing, tourism, finance, and all kinds of corporations. So let's now look into the second segment, that is, what is the causation for this? What are the causes? What is the background to this? We need to look at the historical quick background. Ukraine and Russia, if you have to go into the subject, have something called perceived common identity. Ukraine and Russia both trace their national identity to the Kievan Rus, quote unquote, Kievan Rus of 9th to 13th century. This identity gets consolidated. A medieval state centered in the present day Kiev, you have, these common identities established. Russia has often shared history to argue that the Ukrainians and Russians are one people, where Ukraine sees itself as a distinct nation with its own language, culture, and political trajectory. Now, the imperial and Soviet rule, for centuries, much of the Ukraine was ruled by the Russian Empire. We all know the last phase of it, the Tsar Empire. And later, the Soviet Union, post 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, you have Lenin-led new Soviet Union getting formed. It is there Ukraine is pulled into it. Policies under both systems of the empire as well as the Soviet Union suppressed seemingly or allegedly that the Ukrainian language and autonomy was getting eroded. Now we all know the history. In 1991, Soviet Union collapsed. Ukraine became one of the independent one of the independent countries in 1991, what we call it as a Commonwealth independent states after the collapse of the USSR. So that's like the independence of Ukraine in one way. But the question here is the context of geopolitics I'm bringing in. You have the entire Russia-Ukraine war today is triggered from the assumption that there is NATO expansion. What is NATO? The North Atlantic Treaty Organization. As a counter to what they called it earlier, the Warsaw Pact led by the Soviet Union. You had two power centers at the time in a bipolar world order between 1950s to late 80s is the time when you have these structures which remain. So what is North Atlantic Treaty Organization? It's a military pact led by the US among the European countries to say that the Europe, democracy, capitalism have to be preserved. Therefore, they would like to keep this very military pact. So after the Cold War ended, between 50s to late 80s and early 90s, many East European countries even, joined the NATO. So Russia waited for it. Russia viewed that the NATO's eastward expansion as a quote unquote direct security threat. Let's now understand a bit on the Russian perspective, which is missing in the media. Yeah, what we all consume normally. It's all Western, driven social media, Western driven news which comes in. So seldom we hear about the Russian perspective. What does Russia have to say? So it sees and pursues the very NATO expansion as a direct security threat, especially the idea of Ukraine joining NATO was something unacceptable to the Russian, security, Russian view on their own national security and regional security. Whereas the Ukrainians see joining the NATO or the European Union as a protection against the Russian domination, and probably they want to explore more with the open world or the Western world as well. That is also a choice which we can't discount. But Russia wants a buffer zone, a sphere of influence around its borders. That's very clear, non-negotiable, as they call it. Even today, they use the term, it is existential. So Russia is now giving a clear message that the countries around it, it wants a buffer zone. It doesn't want any NATO missiles or NATO weapons to come to its border, as simple as that. So they wanted to say that there's sphere of influence around the borders. Even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they would like to...
Environment and location setup validated. Measurement system is API. Approve with yes or request changes.
Can we just request the members to mute, please? Some audio messages are popping up. Yeah, thank you. So on the other side, Ukraine wants to present its sovereignty. It wants to do the Western integration. It wants to showcase that it wants to do a freedom of choice, to choose its alliances. Fair enough. Ukraine wants its choices. Exactly, this is the geopolitical clash or the core driver of the very conflict we should understand. Russia has its own perspective here. Ukraine has its own perspective here. Where did they go wrong? Why can't they discuss, dialogue, negotiate under the very diplomacy is something we have to look at. Now, quickly, couple of political events are very important. In the 2014, there is something called the Euro-Maidan Revolution, which is very important. You have in the 2013-14 a mass protest erupts after the Ukraine's pro-Russian leader named Viktor Yanukovych. He is a pro-Russian. He does not want to join NATO or anything like that, and he doesn't want to get into any kind of European Union deal. Now you have the public protest, either spontaneous or induced now, pushes for democracy and European integration. You have Viktor Yanukovych made to flee out. I know somebody who was seen as quote unquote pro-Russian, and he has to go away. Number one. Number two, you also have something issues around the Donbas, the eastern side of Ukraine, has very many issues. But just even before that, you have Russia reclaiming or annexing Crimea is an issue in 2014, which was part of Ukraine. So Russia annexes Crimea, a very strategic, Black Sea port and naval network, which is seemingly in the history that leased out from the Russian side to Ukrainian side around the Soviet era, basically. Now, post-Soviet era, after the disintegration, Russia waits, and during the heightened tension within Ukraine, it annexes it. That gives a big shocker to Ukraine and to the world that why Russia did not use any means of law or any legal methods or a dialogue method. Rather, it had used force and annexed it. So there was a worldwide condemnation towards it, of course. Then you have also the pro-Russian separatists backed by Russia who fought within the Ukrainian system, Ukrainian forces on the eastern Ukraine known as Donbas. Here is the humanitarian dimension, which I initially got interested in, because within Donbas, you have restlessness, you have disturbances, and you have seemingly either internally displaced people or people pushed out of the system. They have to move to Russia to seek and protect their life, what we can call it as the cause of the humanitarian crisis is the systematic persecution. So persecution becomes an issue in itself. Russia sends a message that Ukraine has to bring some order and treat its people equally, but then seemingly there are a lot of allegations of discrimination, use of force, and oppression and suppression seems there. So there is a conflict which simmers there for years, killing several. That is also a context we have. Then the Russia's border geopolitics, which is very important. So Russia thinks that it has to prevent Ukraine from becoming a Western aligned democracy, which could also not only give a message for Ukraine itself, but it also can give a domino effect to Russians to get inspired by the so-called Western aligned democratic model. So here, that's number one. Number two, Russia wants to reassert itself as a great power. For a while, you have Boris Yeltsin and other subsequent transitions, including the emergence of Putin, Vladimir Putin, that you see a situation where Russia was lying low, but Russia wants to also assert itself as either a regional power or as a global power. So that's also a context. It wants to maintain its influence over the former Soviet states. It wants to control or influence the energy routes, especially the Black Sea. These are all some of the context which is there as a geopolitical causation from the Russian thinking, from the Ukrainian point of view, you have. So it's between, not only it's now turning into Russia-Ukraine, but then it's becoming Russia versus the entire Europe in one way. A debate again rekindled what we saw in the time of the Cold War, that is ideologically the authoritarian system versus a democratic model of governance. So very clearly the European membership, the NATO membership are all seen as a threat, including a perspective on their very identity, which is argued as common by Russia, but Ukraine wants to assert its uniqueness, its own language, its own culture. That's where you see a situation today. You have a war, an aggression, which is very much out there, which India now calls it. This is not the age for warfare. This is not the age. It's an age of dialogue, discussion, because India, very much part of the global South, visualizes that we want to have a better world order, which will try to give a sanity, which will also bring in some kind of opportunity, cooperation for the emerging countries. We don't want a parochial nationalism or aggression to come into play, what we call the term the realism-centric geopolitics we did not want to see. So what are the global consequences? We see a renewed East-West confrontation. The NATO is getting strengthened. There's a massive military, financial, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. So Ukraine is not fighting this war alone. Ukraine is just a proxy today. The entire West is waging a war using Ukraine as a pawn here. So you have a situation of Russia not just giving up, rather gaining the ground on with a huge loss of its own soldiers and resources. It is trying to sustain the war now and almost reaching out to the third year, and it wants to do that. So the disruption is into the global energy, global food supply chain. These are all greatly being affected. So the bottom line here is that there is a sovereignty versus authoritarian system or empire, the Western integration versus Russian influence, and the rule-based world order versus the power-based sphere of influence. This is how I think things are actually breaking out. So what is there on card for the peace? The Russia-Ukraine war, as well as the subsequent other events, what US has done in Venezuela and other things, is very clearly sending a very major negative picture, negative impact on the global peace. Not only regionally, but worldwide it is trying to do. What is that? The world wars, particularly the Cold War, shattered the very idea that large-scale war should not actually happen. Russia's invasion openly violating the principles like territorial sovereignty and non-use of force. Even as per the UN Charter, these are very clearly spelled out. The United Nations Charter clearly talk about peace and security. But then these things are getting broken. There is an increased risk of great power conflict. The NATO and Russia are closer to direct confrontation than any other point, be it the Bay of Pigs, be it many other confrontation, including in our own South Asia. In 1971, when we were liberating Bangladesh, you had the American Seventh Fleet versus the Russian or Soviet Black Fleet. We are coming to negotiate in the Indian waters, keeping India into context at that time. So we've seen these close quarters, but today other important area is about the nuclear threat. The nuclear threat, which we thought has got stabilized with many treaties in the past, like START treaties between US and Russia. But today it looks like Russians are giving a clear message that given a situation, they do not mind using, the very nuclear option. That's something unacceptable, that we cannot allow a kind of a nuclear catastrophe. And that's something, in terms of the peace, when we're talking about, it's not just about, a small arms or medium arms, but it's about the nuclear weapons which can be used. And that is, I think, getting re-spiraled again. And what kind of world order peace we will have. I think these warfares are again bringing in a severe, higher risk of miscalculation and escalation. That's something seen as a very bigger threat. So the global polarization and the bloc politics is getting revived today. The world is becoming now more divided. You have the Western bloc, the US, the European Union, the NATO allies are backing Ukraine. You have the Russia is trying to bring in either aligned or neutral countries like China, Iran, North Korea, and some countries in the global South as its direct or indirect partners. So this is going to tremendously affect not just the global trade, not just business, but it's also going to tremendously affect our international cooperation vis-a-vis climate change, arms control, even the way we wanted to solve world conflicts, that is conflict resolution and conflict transformations, are going to be tremendously. So there is going to be lesser trust, fewer diplomatic bridges, and more and more of what we call it as the zero-sum games, part of the realism that you are going to have. That's a huge impact we have. So obviously, the war has emboldened, the Russia-Ukraine war has emboldened many other states to use force, as they believe that they can withstand the sanctions, or it can withstand any kind of coalition or anything. And the major powers are getting distracted. So it has direct implications on places like Taiwan, South China Sea, the entire West Asia, called as the Middle East. All could have a huge impact. We did see even in the post-COVID how the Palestine-Israel conflict resurfaced. There was a tremendous humanitarian catastrophe. Israel went uncontrolled for almost 2 years, butchering the people in Gaza. Very unacceptable. Nobody could stop it. Neither the United Nations, excepting the Secretary General, coming on a daily basis, making a hue and cry, but nothing could stop. But fortunately, whatever the sanity that today you have United States, which has come forward and mediated some kind of the so-called peace, and it will take long time, at least a decade or two to rebuild and reconstruct Gaza and give a dignified things to the Palestinians. I'm sure there has to be something on that front also. But all these got delayed or pushed into the back burner because of these very aggressive geopolitical warfares which we see. So you have huge humanitarian and social consequences as well because of these warfares. As I work on the refugee issues, you have nearly about 128 to 130 million people displaced as refugees, as internally displaced people, which is unbelievable. The paradox here is that on one side you have unbelievable, staggering numbers of 130 million people displaced worldwide because of warfare and other thing. On the other side, you have reduced resources. That's a paradox. You have the UN saying that it is, even in, I'm told with my colleagues, I work very closely with UNHCR, even post academia, they tell me that out of every 3 people, almost 1 staff is getting removed. So 1/3 they are removing already. There's a pressure that probably even another 1/3 may get disrupted with the admission in the last couple of days. The UN Secretary General telling that UN is collapsing. Financially they are not even able to keep the bare minimum. Is something very sad that you have escalated pressure on one side, humanitarian spending. On the other side, you have reduced resources. I think this is something. A very huge challenge. There's a massive civilian casualties, infrastructure destruction. There's a long-term trauma, militarization of societies. Where are we, going to? These are all something which we need to look at. I'll come to the economic aspect of it. So I spoke about the disruption of food supply, the grain export. Almost the Russia-Ukraine war alone, 1/3 or almost 50%, 40 to 50% of the food grain supplies came from Ukraine, Russia, particularly to the very poor and developing countries in the African region, particularly, or even to the Middle East. That's something very a huge challenge seen in the last 2 or 3 years. You have the huge energy market impact. Entire Europe was depending on the energy. As I go to Europe to teach as a visiting faculty, in front of my eyes in the last 2-3 years, I saw how even the professors, were facing the difficulty in paying the energy prices. That they told very clearly that their gas bills have doubled or tripled in the last 2 or 3 years. So very visible on the food sector, on the other arena where you have huge impact. Imagine if Europe could, get so much affected. Imagine the inflation, economic pressure in vulnerable countries, especially in Africa, in parts of Asia. You have the economic hardships fueling the political unrest and conflict, as we saw a tremendous challenge in our neighborhood itself, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal. The political unrest is very clearly linked to the global economic impact in a way. So peace is directly connected economic insecurity, and vice versa. If you cannot maintain peace, it's going to affect the economic processes as well. There is also weakening of the international institutions. We talked about how not only there's a fund crisis for the UN, even the UN Security Council, as we know, 5 permanent members and 10 non-permanent members, elected members, how the veto system in itself could make it very difficult to pass resolutions and get into any action. This exposes the limits of global governance when there is actually a need for better global governance and architecture, which has to take care of peace, security. So it's a tremendous impact on the very conflict resolution mechanism itself, that we are having the global peace getting deteriorated, more tensions, militarization, mistrust among the nations are some of the challenges. The world is entered into a more fragmented and militarized era, and the long-term impacts could be that war ends through diplomacy, stalemate, escalation. So it's all about power, security, identity, territory built over the years. And I spoke about NATO expansion, the Ukraine's political choice and shift, the Crimea and Donbass as a challenge which we saw. Today, you have Russians have seemingly 1/3 of Ukraine has been militarily taken over. Ukraine is trying its best to resist it, to give a message. And somebody, even before we started the conversation or this discussion, asked a question: when is the war going to end? That's very difficult to answer when it is going to end. Somebody thought it will end within a month after it started. Somebody thought it will end at least within 3-4 months. But it's almost now 3 years plus, and then there seems to be no clarity on it. So you have Ukrainians at the more receiving end, because they are directly impacted. Their women, children, most of them have been displaced outside. How do they live? How do they struggle? What do they do? Even the Europe has shown a lot of empathy and compassion towards them, and it is very difficult. It's going to take long time for the Ukrainians to rebuild. Let's hope that there will be definitely a dialogue, definitely a diplomacy, and a solution. I'm sure this is something that we needed to look at. Now, let me come to next 2-3 minutes. I'll try to wrap it up. What is that we are trying to look at? Now, Russians have demonstrated their own resilience in fighting what we can call it as a low intensity or a prolonged or protracted war as a methodology. But the Russians are today conveying a message also that they are not only interested in protecting their Eurasian theater of domination or control, but they also wanted to participate in the global arena. We do not know. So today we also have another global scenario where there is seemingly a decline of America, and there is a rise of China also as a context. We need to take that kind of a global geopolitical shifts happening. In this shift, how this war it's going to reshape is something very quite complex. Definitely, it has a huge impact and credibility when the Europeans relied on the moral position of NATO led by the United States. The fact that Americans have indulged themselves or intervened into Venezuela, Maduro's displacement, I think as that moral position has gone down, that has also added a bit of complexity. If tomorrow they have to question Chinese intervention or aggression in Taiwan, what moral position America or Europe will have is also questioned. With all this political scenario, which I'm trying to present when it is in perspective, we need to see how we are going to address the energy crisis, the food security, inflation, the supply chain, and the regeneration of the global economy growth, with the inflation, with the financial market volatility. All these are into question. We see another development. I'll just try to conclude now by saying that the Russia-Ukraine war was quoted as an example. And in this context, when the Russians were trying to switch over their oil supply to Europe, to other countries, where India came into picture, India tried to buy the oil at a lesser price. and it was able to utilize it. It took some time, but then the Western countries and the United States in particular came knocking at our door, telling that neither India took a position on Russia-Ukraine war, nor you are stopping purchase of war by buying the Russian oil. They were alleging almost that India is indirectly fueling the war. But that's not the case. We all know the Russia-Ukraine war has different layers. We cannot be blamed for it. Here, I would like to quote Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar, who also happens to be a Jainite belonging to the very School of International Studies. I would like to tell we have this very simple and very assertive External Affairs Minister who gave a powerful message. Even in the beginning, when India was asked to take a position, particularly to criticize or condemn Russian intervention in Ukraine, he gave a message that we do not want to get into any of these positions. We don't want to be dragged into this war. We would like to remain neutral. He gave a quotation. He said that Europe thinks that its problem is world's problem. It also thinks that world's problem can never be its problem. So he tries to bring in this irony that Europe, when it gets into a kind of a tussle, wants the entire world to take a position, when there were enormous amount of warfares around the world which were happening. They weren't bothered, and they weren't taking any position or any question. Therefore, this message brings in 2-3 elements for India very quickly. That it's not India wants to indirectly benefit from the war and to get a cheaper oil, but I think India wants to keep a position of what we call it as the strategic autonomy. It does not want to be influenced by any power structures, any global powers to dictate what position we should take. Even as we were closer to United States, what is called as the strategic partners or age-old, larger democracies working together, all these are there. But India wants to say that we want to tell the world that we are moved away from the non-alignment, non-engaging, to more of multi-alignment, that we want to multi-align with several countries at the same time, and wanted to tell the world that we would like to have our own choices, what we call it as in our foreign policy position today called the strategic autonomy. We would like to simultaneously deal with many players, be it United States, be it Russia, be it China, be it Europe, be it the global South countries, what even we call as the coalitions called BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Anywhere, everywhere, we would like to have our own autonomy and pick and choose rather than being driven in a particular direction, because simply that we are not a banana republic. We are a growing democracy. The way we would like to see the world order, that it should be rule-based, it should be very democratic. I would even convey another important message that we would like to similarly see India, not connected to the topic, but we would like to see an India which is also going to address internal issues of the paradox of $4 trillion economy versus 135th, 136th rank in Human Development Index. These paradox we need to address. We need to also promote equity, participation, democracy, take care of the vulnerable groups within our society, in our country. And therefore, we will be able to bridge the gap that internally we are able to bring a very peaceful, prosperous, inclusive society. And similarly, we would like to see in the international arena a peaceful world order where everybody could participate. India would continue to be a bridge between the global South and the global North. Therefore, we look at this warfare not in isolation, but in a perspective that this war has to end definitely at the earliest possible. It has to end. And in this way, we have to preserve the sovereignties, preserve the world order, and bring peace, because peace and development is directly a continuum, and these have to be done. We need to re-strengthen the United Nations. We need to re-strengthen the multilateral institutions, and we need to also bring in a kind of a multipolar world order, not a unipolar world order led by one country, or bipolar world order just led by, let's say, United States and China tomorrow. We don't want that kind of a thing. We want to have the distribution of power where all the Committee of Nations can equally participate and look forward for a peaceful world order. I'll stop here and look forward for the questions. Thank you once again to you all.
Sir, this is excellent insight. Global crisis, what we are facing today, which has got direct impact on the business, how we do in a day-to-day issues here. Thank you for enlightening us with this wonderful insight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you have any more questions or any insights? It's a conversation. It's not just, I just said I am just presenting something in perspective.
Let me go ahead with
This
this.
is, Professor, this is N.S. Murthy. Just to, I may be looking a little idealistic, but nevertheless, let me ask this question to you. One of the biggest challenge I find that of late, we are all becoming extreme, right-wing kind of polarization is taking place in any country for that matter. Like you rightly said about China is trying to bulldoze Taiwan. Of course, one change is that Hong Kong was not taken over by China. It was annexed back after 99 years of lease, which was taken. That's a history. What I'm trying to say is that even in India, for example, we were non-alignment, we were really good in the sense that we were keeping all the people at bay and we were doing only business with all the people about. But unfortunately, we could not mend our ways with our neighbor and we created a lot of mess. Even today, if you look at it, the Aganda Bharat is something, I don't know, I mean, see, the geography can always, history can change, but geography will remain as it is. So what is the point having whether it's a Aganda Bharat or small Bharat? Because India did that right or wrong. East Pakistan and West Pakistan became two different countries. Having such a good historical way of making the things, why not we try to remain peaceful, at least make our leaders to talk about, at least in a polite manner. Whoever is talking this kind of Aganda Bharat, unwanted things, why we should worry about? Let the people, it's like grandfather trying to control the grandchildren. No, you are still not, even after marriage and having a kid, no. It looks really ridiculous in our part. So that's where I find it that the politicians are making this problem or something else is happening. Your views.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think you're right in mentioning that, when we are talking about realism of expansion and power and survival versus liberalism on cooperation. I think, as I said earlier, that India very much believed in that. We believed in the Gandhian principles as well of non-violence, ahimsa, both internal and external. That is supposed to be, but then today you have the regimes which may want to give these kind of words like Aganda Bharat and other thing. I don't think this was there a decade before. Definitely we need to understand one thing. Whatever has happened during the British India and what we see as a post-independent phase, it's a reality and we have accepted it and we need to accept it and preserve it. Whatever has happened, Pakistan, East and West got born, and then the East Pakistan became Bangladesh, and they are our neighbors. And I think we need to respect it. In simple words, we cannot try to go into any kind of aggression, changing the borders, wanting to, go and expand and all that is, I think, in my, to my mind, it's a nonsense, that we are trying to not respect that. We need to, I think, respect the line of control, the boundaries. And even certain contentious issues like Kashmir have to be understood in that perspective, and we need to resolve it. We can't try to, talk about expansion. I will, try to make Aganda Bharat and all that. But, these are, I think, very much going to be adverse to our principles. We need to, practice what we preach. So what we are preaching today to the world is that we would like to see a peaceful world order. We would like to have rule-based world order. We would like to have cooperation. But I'm sure I'm not talking in the air. These things were very carefully thought about, not now, 2 or 3 decades back. We had a humble, not so visible foreign minister and prime minister as well, I.K. Gujral. He had contributed one important doctrine. It itself is called Gujral Doctrine. He talked about good neighborly relations. If you don't have a good neighborly relations, you don't have that consolidation, you're constantly under insecurity. He therefore proposed that we should do non-reciprocal good relations with them. You do good to them, you don't expect from the smaller neighbors back good. So therefore, that concept is very, very important. Maybe a very ideational, maybe idealistic part of idealism. But I feel it's very, very important that that's where the South Asia Free Trade Agreement, South Asia Preferential Trade Agreement, all these happened as India was trying to grow in the 90s. You had these models allowed these countries to come and do trade and economy with us. And that's where we built a kind of a good buffer and insulation for quite some time. Now that is getting breached or broken, what we call the Chinese intrusion today, whether we like it or not. Realistically, the Chinese are coming with their Belt and Road Initiative. They're coming with their, a kind of surrounding the Indian Sea, whether it is Sri Lanka or Maldives, the pearl of string or string of pearl strategy is also something we need to take note of from our national security and our regional interest, peace and balance. We need to look into all that. I think these are the elements we need to see, not to see whether India will expand. India need to preserve what we are, ensuring whether it is Chinese trying to intrude into Sikkim or Arunachal or some of the northern pockets. In a similar way, vice versa, that we need to tell that we have no interest in expansion. I think in our foreign policy so far, I've never seen that India wants to expand. I'm talking about official foreign policy. Maybe some fringe elements may be speaking this language of Akhanda Bharat and all, but I don't think it is part of any of our principles or strategy, that I would put it in a nutshell. Thank you.
No, the reason is that, see, if you look at the Singapore, once it was part of Malaysia, then it came out, then again it became together, then finally they're separate. Similarly, you rightly said about EU. EU, I mean, European Union had a lot of quarrels within them, maybe in 1900 or whatever time, but now they are working together with all Schengen visas. So why not India also take up such things with all that Asian countries to have some kind of a common visa and things like that. See, there are examples available. The only thing is we don't want to do it because there are vested interests. Somehow I believe the people who are in the arms dealer guys are really creating nuisance for the rest of the world. They don't want other people to remain peaceful. Anyway.
That's right. I entirely agree with you. Just to add an element, India did believe in regional cooperation, the way you have European Union or African Union and all that. I think somehow or other our SARC, South Asian Regional Cooperation, somehow did not, it took off in a way, in a lukewarm, but it could not sustain itself. A very simple that it's actually the Indo-Pak tensions continuously derailed it. That's the reason we went into BIMSTEC and other regional forum strengthening. We started doing other things. But I think end of the day, whether we like it or not, we need to kind of address that core issue of building back that good neighborly relations. Maybe I'm speaking in a very ideal sense, but I think that alone will bring better peace in the region. We need to definitely address our two neighbors, one China, other is Pakistan. Besides that, there are a lot of other goodwill and other things, ups and downs, but then, yeah, we can always address it. So in that sense, yes, we need to take on the, elephant in the room, and that has to be in some point to bring dialogue and bring, a very big stability in the region is important. Yes, I agree.
Thank you.
In fact, if I could also join inside the same argument which was put down, this is one of the very important things. Creating a regional stability is one of the most important things. Now, regional stability has to be taken by the leader. In fact, down the lane, when the USSR collapsed, one of the countries that learned a lot of lessons was China, because when the USSR collapsed, we usually say one thing that which Napoleon did notice was when poverty was growing in the world, and at the same time across the regions, he realized that the Communist Party was growing more. So when poverty increases, he realized that the Communist Party was growing more as an ideology. So how the USSR usually did was, Moscow was rich, but the satellite countries were poor. So thereby, at one point of time, as the times passed, in the 1990s, poverty increased very high to the satellite countries, and thereby the satellite countries collapsed. And then, like at some point of time, nobody even till date wants to align with Moscow, because they all felt that Moscow grows rich at the cost of us. And what do we gain being a part of the communist ideology or being with Moscow? But then what China realized is, if I strengthen my neighboring countries, then everybody is going to be a friend of mine. And thereby, what they ensured is all the neighboring countries economically benefit out of this, creating a network externality effect, right from Vietnam to the whole Southeast Asia. All these regions really benefited, and thereby they became close to China. And then came the belt policy, and then like expanding to Bangladesh as well, to Nepal as well, to Sri Lanka as well. So China's influence increased tremendously. But again, the question that comes inside is the other leader over there, which is India. Now, is India still able to create a friendly relationship? Now, this is, in fact, I liked every part of Professor Karikalan's lecture. It was amazing. He had the same ideology of how a professor has based on the field of international relations, very neutral perspective. However, on one part of it is, how is India really taken the relationships, and where does India stand? Today, honestly speaking, India is totally isolated. India has no friends. India's foreign policy is a failure. It has all enemies or animosity created around the world. Now, European Union, probably they had the FTA, but then it's at benefit of the European Union. Is European Union really a friend of India? Is a question mark. US is a question mark. When there was a war, at that time, India realized that we don't have any friends in the region. So at some point of time, somewhere, it needs to create a stable relationship, which is very important. It needs to mend back its friends, which is very important. And as I mentioned, how China created a stability, similarly, India has failed to hold back its own friends. Now, the only friend that India is left with is Afghanistan. So that's where we have come to this particular state, which is there. So this is one of the things when you mentioned across about Akhand Bharat and these things, at some point of time, probably these are used for electoral politics, but then it creates a kind of animosity with the countries outside as well. And thereby these are really some things which are very bad for a geopolitical relationship from the perspective of India, indeed.
All right, thank you, Dr. Vivek. I appreciate your views. But all the three you quoted, I would like to slightly differ and tell you the different perspective. One, you talked about Russia and the former Soviet Union member states. You called it satellite states. See, Soviet Union is a model. It was a model created post 1917 Bolshevik Revolution to tell the world how, from a very poor agrarian economy, they can shift into massive industrialized society within a very, very short span of time. Lenin, Stalin, that phase I'm talking about. Besides their political actions, besides their authoritarianism, if you look at the social economic transformation, it is very tremendous. Just to give you one example to counter your perspective. You take Tajikistan. There's a statistic which shows in the 1920s and 30s when it got integrated, by the time 1940s and 50s, within a matter of 2 decades, it goes from mere 4-5% of literacy to almost 80 to 90% of literacy. This is the achievement of the Soviet Union from a social, economic, educational dynamics I'm giving you. What we are struggling for these 8 decades to achieve the literacy, they could do it in a matter of 2.5 decades. That really shows that they did not discriminate the satellite countries, so-called. Rather, they kept as a union. What failed is their whole model collapsed. What they kept as a communism or socialism as a model collapse. As the model collapsed, obviously they could not sustain. They agreed that everybody will go on their own, and that's how it went about. Number one. Number two, you talked about China and how its modus operandi is helping the countries and all. Rather, I will strongly disagree with a statement by saying what Chinese are doing is something called as a debt control model. They will give loans to the countries and they will make them to repay. If they cannot repay, they will take territories. One classic example is our neighbor Sri Lanka. if you look at the Hambantota port, what they built parallel to the pre-existing famous Colombo port, the Hambantota port, they poured in billions, made the Sri Lankans take the money, build it, a very unviable port, and the Sri Lankans could not pay back any interest. Then they told them, then in that case, you have to lease out the territory. Today, they've taken a lot of territories, which is also very adverse to Indian interests, but yes, they've taken it as a land. This has happened in Malaysia, this has happened in Indonesia. So what the Chinese present is not that very sustainable good model. What they are similarly doing in Africa, in other Latin American countries are also the same. So I feel that, to appreciate Chinese have a good model, I don't know. It's a very debatable one, second. The third, coming to European Union and the relations, you talked that it is nothing there. But yes, the very, there is definitely a huge, you can call it, lack of convergence at some point of time. But the fact that today they have done the trade deal, what they call it as a quote unquote mother of all deal, all that stuff, also makes the European Union realize that they cannot rely on America as a sole partner in one way, nor India should, remain with any fixed partners. I think when India is trying to look for alternative venues, I think the European Union came in that sense of it, and then they have converged on some sense of it. I'm sure in the long run, in terms of rule of law, restoration of multilateral institutions, I think India, Europe, rather relations will be a very genuine one to build on it. That's what I feel on the three. But I agree to some larger views you had given, but I just thought I will clarify this.
In fact, like these are the difference of views that comes inside, especially from the perspective of seeing things. Because when I mentioned about the European perspective, I'll give you a very simple example of what the same thing that you mentioned, the East Berlin and the West Berlin. Now, when we come down to East Berlin, the East Berlin was struck with poverty. Now, it's just like, the other side of West Berlin, they had the most high-speed trains which were running at 350 miles. And then the East Berlin, they had the trains which are running at 60 miles and 70 miles and 80 miles. And similarly, the cars and the development and everything. So what people realized is where the capitalism influence and the US influence came inside, there was much more of a prosperity. And the other part of the USSR, obviously, when we see across from Tajikistan or from Kyrgyzstan or the regions over there, probably over there the development happened. That's what we might say. But still, people actually were used to migrate to Moscow in order for search of jobs. That's the migration that used to happen. Similarly, people always felt uncontented because they always felt that Moscow is much more powerful in terms of everything as compared to us, which is there. That's one of the reasons which has been one where I mentioned again, where the break happened. The second part of it, which was the Chinese part, which again I would still state across, is that predatory economics, which you mentioned, paying money and then controlling, that's the same thing which the US did. Because the German Marshall Fund, where they funded the whole world, and then they control the whole the UK to the Europe to everything. Now, somewhere at some point of time today, we criticize the Chinese, but then we accepted the US dominance. At some point of time, the Chinese believe that giving debts and controlling is where we control. Bottom line is taking control and power. So at some point of time, probably there are criticisms against China. I feel taking over the leadership, I appreciate the way China has taken over. And at some point of time, Russia failed to hold this across. So somewhere these are the difference of opinions of arguments which will come inside from different perspectives indeed.
Sure. I think that difference in perception, let it prevail, because always we should believe in multiple perspectives.
Exactly. Yes.
Agree to.
It's the talk of the Chinese or the Chinese way or the American way. At some point of time, I personally feel the Chinese are criticized a lot.
One point just to take notice, see what Americans did post Bretton Woods or what the Chinese today they're doing. I think in a very principled way, in a neutral way, if you have to look at, we have to actually question both actually. That's what I'm trying to say. Just because Americans did it, we don't have to agree. Just because Chinese do, we don't have to oppose. But I think we need to look at the consequences, how these are impacting the relation. So in that sense, I think we need to definitely look at in a very balanced, impartial way. One wrong cannot justify another wrong. So therefore, that's why I use the word that we don't want anybody to misuse the systems and dominate the world. That's what the lessons we are learning. That's what we are trying to connect, that we believe in multilateralism and multipolar world order, not just a unipolar or bipolar. Yeah. Anybody?
Thank you, sir. Yes. Anbaragan, sir.
Another one, actually, I'm Anbaragan. Actually, the Japanese, after the World War II, America financed Japan to become a first world country. But the whole money is paid by America, and the supply, everything is to America. Same way, Professor told that there is a lot of World Bank Fund. It's mostly supply, all the equipments, everything is to be supplied by Western countries. So this is a part of the politics, funding and controlling the whole economy of some other countries, very normal. When China is doing, we are averse to it. But now the US is now isolating everybody, friend or foe, everybody with tariffs and threatening everybody. When everybody is going to boycott America, what will happen to America? Can you able to give me some insight?
I think you yourself raised a question, you yourself answered. When you are trying to dominate too much, people will teach you a lesson, that kind of a situation. I think what is happening is today you have a very arrogant, rude, very assertive or over-ambitious president of United States, that is Trump, who is trying to bring in too much of realism into flow. See, Americans always wanted to dominate, and they would like to keep, at times, the Democrats keep it subtle, the Republicans come and keep it open. But today you have Trump, who goes to the extent of exposing everything, what America thinks and what he wants to visualize. And therefore, he's telling the world that I will not allow Mexicans to come, I'll build a wall, I will put tariffs if countries don't listen to me. I will go to Greenland or I will go to Venezuela for oil or other sake. Even I'll add the element of geopolitics. What are they doing in Venezuela, for example? It's not just that, they're talking about narcotics as a reason where there's a narco terror or narco cross-border influence, and therefore they wanted to take a legal punishment. Now, beyond that, there are many layered things. One, people perceive that they wanted oil, and Venezuela today has almost $5 trillion worth oil beneath their land, and therefore it wants to control the oil. But all these oil, Americans actually don't need it. What Americans want is that this oil should not go to an adversary like China, in order to ensure that the oil does not go to other countries. So they wanted to control it. So that is the geopolitical element of it. They wanted to eliminate a leader who has a bit of socialism or communism as a principle. Now, rather than respecting a neighbor and political diversity, they wanted to impose their ideology on them. They're entering their Venezuela and trying to impose their puppet regimes there. That itself is violation of sovereignty, violation of international law.
What is petrodollar? Petrodollar.
Yeah, but there is also geopolitics I'm adding, not only for the oil's sake, but also they want to ensure that oil doesn't go to countries. So today, Chinese have a huge dependence on oil imports. They were working with Venezuela. They're trying to get oil supply. If they can cut off that oil supply to China, they also want to cut off the energy needs for their AI development, for their other economic growth, for their military development. So this is also probably a future ambitious geopolitical control Americans want to do in this course. Therefore, I'm just trying to put this as a case example to say Americans might have a very hardcore realism in terms of realist approach in terms of the world order, and they want to sustain. But definitely Americans are on the decline. That is being assessed by many analysts. In the next 2 or 3 decades, they will definitely have to decline and give away their dominating position. One example here which is emerging is also the BRICS. For example, this so-called global South solidarity, BRICS nations consisting of the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are giving a new message, not only the European Union and the Euro currency, but also that they want to bring an alternative currency and also wanted to end the domination of Russian American dollar in a way. So I think that is also a message which is happening. So whatever the Americans have had so far has been good. They have had their good times in the last 5-6 decades. But I think now either they have to keep democratic world order, rule-based world order, and they need to be a leader in a sense today also as a global leader, or the so-called superpower status if they want to enjoy. I think they have to come back to morality, ethics, and rule of law. They can't violate all these things and then remain a leader. The fact that, look here, in the Davos World Economic Summit recently, a very clear message was given by the Europe that you can't come to our territory and play the games here. When they were playing such games in Afghanistan, Iraq, and many other countries, even Venezuela, they did not give such severe condemnation. The moment he wanted to come to Greenland and grab Greenland very openly, the Europe resisted it heavily, and he had to mellow down and convey a message that for the time being, I'm not touching Greenland. So he wants to look at Greenland, probably its minerals, its geopolitical position, that they wanted to probably control it and then see that it is not used by the adversary like Russia for the future, whatever. They have their own calculations, they're coming in. But that's not the way to intrude into somebody's sovereignty, which is under the control of Denmark today, that they want to disrupt it. I think probably a little more of sanity, diplomacy, and rules and regulations we need to bring in. That's the only way we can, conduct our affairs. You can't just do what you want and call it that because I'm powerful, I will do whatever I want. I think Americans cannot do that anymore. That's the point. To tell very clearly, I think the world is watching, and clearly they're seeing American intentions as clearly imperialism. And the imperialism has ended 70, 80 years back with the end of colonialism, end of world wars. So I think we cannot go back to that imperialist agenda of one country wanting to dominate by doing all that. Rather, they have to play by the rule book and see how we can have the order and the trade and relations and bring stability. Yeah.
Anand, would you like to share your views, Anand? Anand Kumar?
Yes, please.
Anand Kumar?
Yeah, Gopi.
Rajendra? Yeah, please. Yeah, you can share your views, Anand, if you feel like.
No, actually, it's what I feel is it's a petrodollar. These guys want to control oil. US want to control oil. Wherever we are moving towards, even India, they are trying to cut off oil to India. This is what they are trying to do. Even we have OVL as a stake in Venezuelan oil. But we are not able to get even the dividends which is supposed to come out of the Venezuelan oil field. A lot of discussions are going on. Even in fact, last week we were in Goa, Indian Energy Week. This was a lot of discussions going on regarding this Venezuelan oil. But America wants to control this oil because it's going to be cheap, not easy to process. But certain countries like India and China has got the ability to process. Even in India, Reliance, Naira, or even MRPL, they have got some capability to process Venezuelan oil, which is very, very cheap and very, very hard to process. So that's why this US is trying to now black out Venezuela, and he wants to sell in local currencies or whatever it is. He doesn't want to trade in US dollars. This is what happened to Saddam Hussein, this is what happened to Gaddafi, and it's happening to Venezuelan president. So purely it's a game played by US. I'm not sure how it's going to pan out in oil industry. But even Russian oil, they have played a lot, and then they put a lot of restrictions, which now we have stopped buying oil. We have to see now what's going to happen now. Not very clear. How Trump, because Trump is every day morning you get up, you get a shock. So we have to know, wait and watch.
Exactly. This is what, I was also saying, it's all about oil, and geopolitics are interconnected. And again, this oil, not for US consumption, but they wanted to ensure that this oil does not reach whom they don't want to reach.
Exactly, because, sir, that's what I was telling. Mainly Venezuelan oil is expected to come to China and India. In fact, 1 week before the kidnapping of this fellow, the Venezuelan president, There's a big Chinese delegates sitting in Venezuela and discussing about oil. This is what we heard of. I'm not sure how much true it is.
Yes.
Finally, it's all boiling down to how Trump can corner India and China. It looks like.
Exactly. See, these whole scenarios, what we are witnessing is one, the day-to-day, information, the day-to-day announcements of Trump, which are very alarming at what one way. As I was telling that he is revealing more than what he's supposed to do. So with his very assertive, very self-interested approach, that he reveals the American interest, I would call it that way. It is good. At least we know what is Trump and what America wants to do. And let it be an open domain so that we will be able to anticipate and prepare ourselves, whether it is Europe, whether it is the South America, whether it is Africa or Asia or India. I think it's better that we should be prepared for this kind of a new national interest centric or ultra national centric policies which are coming out in open. I think we need to probably learn a lesson. What is the lesson India could have? Probably that we are also going in that pathway, and let us better keep our internal order, internal commitment, as well as the international arena we should do. Our friend Dr. Vivek was telling that India has no friends. There again, it's not that India doesn't have friends, but India certainly is in a better position today to leverage something, in the world arena, whether it is, the optics we have created or really that we are creating or whatever. But at least we can call it that there's a momentum today that India can participate in the regional as well as to some extent in the world affairs. The world is looking at it, but it is actually how do we pick and choose, make our choices in the chaotic VUCA world I was calling in the beginning, the volatile, uncertain, chaotic, anarchic world order. We have to make right choices. And we can't just be driven by something. Okay, you come to the Western side, you just follow blindly the Western side. Not so. I think that is where we need to, balance ourselves, reposition ourselves. What kind of world order, what kind of world economic system we want to see. I think we need to do it in a very balanced way and keep that consistency, I guess. We cannot, go into a very hurried thing. But definitely the world, the top countries where they are moving are quite, selfish. What Thomas Hobbes I was referring to, a Hobbesian world order where they want to be very nasty, very brutal, and they want to be very controlling kind. I think that's not what the world wants. We want, a better approach, a better way to look at it. But that's a kind of an idealism we expect in a very realistic world order, which is today.
Since your point just brought up one more in my mind, I thought let me just clarify. See, the country like Switzerland, they have a similar like India, several languages, maybe around 6 or 7. Like India has got around 20 plus. And then they're able to maintain their peace and then work in a very wonderful manner. Why India cannot leverage some of the ideas from them and try to work on it? See, another one is always says that if our internal happiness is very poor, you can't have external happiness at all. I mean, the percentage of internal satisfaction, what we call, no, with all that, every second day you find some SRM or I don't know what are SAR or CAA, all kind of things they keep on talking about, or put the people in prison, and it is painful to go through. What kind of world we are trying to hand out to our next generation. Your views on India versus Switzerland, or Baltic countries like Sweden, where people are really at least much more happiness index, they are far better.
The answer is very simple. These countries, the Nordic countries, what you are referring with a very, very high human development index, because of their smaller population, better governance, better, public, services which they get. They may get taxed more. I would quote our good friend, Mr. Suresh Mariaselvam, who had gone to study there and been there for a while, used to quote that they used to take higher taxation and give all their benefits in their, post-retirement health, plans, or housing and other things. So I think these countries have done a much better, public services model, which is neither purely capitalist, neither purely communist. I think this is where they have done a success of reaching out to the human needs and security built in, what we call it as a social contract. You agree to come in and give your some portion of rights where the state take care of your other part of the rights, is what we call it as a social contract of a modern nation state. If that is the core to understand, I think the Sweden, the Norway, the Switzerland, and other countries you're referring, smaller populations, better governance, better accountability. You don't have greedy politicians trying to loot the system. There is a lot of accountability. So therefore, they have created a model where they take from people and give back to people. Now, what is happening in other parts, including India so far? The Britishers have looted us, what Dadabhai Nauroji called as the drain theory. Till today, there is actually a drain going on. Only the drain, it is not gone out to the whites, the British, rather it's going out to those in power. I think that's a very sad thing which is going on. Today, what we are also witnessing in India is also crony capitalism. In the name of opening up of economy, we should have gone face by face and ensured there is an inclusion. People in the rural areas and others could clearly participate and be part of the system of growth. But today what is happening is the cities are becoming very stronger and the rural areas have got underdevelopment. In a similar way, there's a widening of a gap. Some of the statistics clearly show the rich are becoming richer and poor are becoming poorer. That's a very sad for Indian context. We need to take care of bridging all these things, and then we could look out for a better system of governance and better system of outputs in terms of human development. When do we climb from 135, 136 out of 150 countries to go to the top 10 at least? That's, I think, the question. There lies the question as well as the answer. What kind of a society we will transform into? So that, I think, that's what I connected. As we are talking of international relations, it cannot be in the air. We want to see an ideal world without war, peace and prosperity. It has to be connected to our internal order also. The internal order, I meant the social economic transformation, what our founding fathers and mothers of Indian Constitution debated in the Constituent Assembly to see India which is transformed into a socially and economically and politically, culturally preserving our diversity. How do we keep national growth? I think that is the challenge we have. That's the challenge we have. We need to do it. We can't have one nation, one religion, one culture. This is also a problem which we need to address within the country. So therefore, I try to fuse these commitments which we speak in the international arena of inclusion, of equity, participation. We need to also practice it in the system. Yes, we have lots and lots of vulnerable communities within the country. So many of scheduled caste, the Adivasis, the scheduled, the Dalits, the Adivasis, the marginalized poor. We have so much still. I mean, officially we are showing we are 10% or 12% of people living below poverty line. But just 2-3 years back, they showed statistically that how during COVID, it's almost 40% plus which are below poverty line. That's the kind of vulnerability we have. We have to build on inclusion, distribution, all that are needed actually. That commitment, I think we need to definitely look at these countries which you're quoting, Sweden, Denmark, Norway. All these countries have done tremendously on the social welfare. I think the social welfare is an important commitment. We should keep it as we want to grow, I feel.
Thank you.
In fact, like if I could just add a little bit onto this, I was there at Oulu, which is one of the very small towns in Finland, just before a couple of months being a part of the ECP. Now, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, the whole, we call this as the Nordic economy. And as mentioned now, the amount of tax which is collected is definitely higher, 45%, but then the amount of welfare that they offer to people is extremely higher. So that's where it drives the happiness index in terms of education, literacy, in terms of health, and all these factors. Now, beyond this, when I went to Finland, I really felt, are these Finnish people, why are these people considered as happy? Because what is that happiness? I mean, happiness is not something which it can be measured. But then I realized one reason why they mentioned as happy is These people were those people whom the Scandinavians, who are the Western Europeans, they also felt that these people belong to us. Though the Swedes control over there as one of the power centers over there, they also accept them as their culture. And similarly, the Eastern Europeans, who are like Bulgaria, Poland, Estonia especially, these people again also started accepting the Finnish. Usually what happens is a Finnish boy will get married to an Estonian girl. So that's how the relationships have started bridging up. So what happens, Finland is always seen as one of the countries within Europe, which is accepted to all the countries. And then similarly, as you mentioned about Switzerland and the Neutrality Act, so they kept themselves out of the wars and everything. It's amazing for these discussions, especially in the morning, to have these things. But there is only one last thing which I mentioned across for everybody to rethink across, because everybody's perspective is only from the Indian perspective. But let's see the European or the Western perspective also. India has been purchasing oil from Russia at a very colossal level, which is especially Reliance and Naira. That's not meant for the Indians. At some point of time, what the US feels is we are basically spending our taxpayers' money inside the war which is happening. The Europeans are paying their taxpayers' money in order for the war which is happening. So thereby, it's a lose-lose situation for the Europeans. For the Americans, it's a win-lose situation because they're selling obviously the weapons, but at the same time, the taxpayers' money is going in. For the Russians, they are also spending their whole wealth inside the war. So it's a lose-lose situation. Now, who's gaining from this war? It's India. Why it's gaining from the war? India is not gaining as a country, but then a few billionaires like the Reliance Energy and Naira are purchasing the oil, and then they are selling it back to the Europeans at a higher price. At some point of time, the US feels that if the war needs to be brought to an end, then we need to ensure that India stops buying the war. Obviously, India is right on its perspective, because what India is doing is there is a war going on, I'm making money out of this, or probably a few billionaires are making money out of this. The US is right on their perspective. At some point of time, if the war needs to stop, then India needs to stop buying oil. So that's where at some point of time, we see the Indian perspective and we feel that the US is selfish. But the same way, US also feels that India is selfish in this particular perspective. So the arguments and perspective are multi-perspective. So we go, if an issue has to be sorted out, we need to see things from their spectrum. This is a perspective which I wanted to share. This,
I just want to add on, because since I'm a refiner, whatever points you have kept may not be correct. First of all, oil we started purchasing from Russia only on request of US. US came in and told to buy oil. That's how we started buying oil. Second, it is not only Reliance and Naira buying oil. Naira is a Russian company altogether. So they have a full Rosneft is the Russian company. All public sectors bought oil from Russia. It is not only Reliance, not only Adani made money, not only Ambani made money. Even Government of India made money. Second, the oil price when we started buying, we had a delta of $10 to $12. But of late, the price has come down to up to $1 or $2. There was no margin which was available, which started when Russia-Ukraine war started. The time what cracks we had, we never had when we stopped reserving. We had just $1 or $2, that's all, when compared to the Middle East. So there was no big money in Russian oil. Second, the product prices are controlled by international pricing. We don't have any control over international pricing. It is a crack which is controlled by the market. So the Adani, Ambani making money is not the correct, because this is a general opinion which is floating around. Everybody made money for a year. Afterwards, the Russian oil price also shot up. And in fact, Europeans are generously taking gas. They are taking gas to run their country from Russia. That nobody is questioning. That is very, very unfortunate. Europe was running only with Russian oil and Russian gas. Today also, Europe as a whole continent are going to suffer because of these Trump's issues, because they are not going to get oil. So it is not that Russian oil was so cheap. Yes, once upon a time, not on a full-fledged, all for all 3-4 years. And it was only on the behest of Trump, the oil started flowing towards India and China. This is my comment.
In fact, like there is a statistics record that says that ONGC, how much they purchased, the other state-owned oil, how much they purchased, and then Rosneft and the Naira, which is the same Russian company's establishment, and then Reliance Energy. When we see this percentage of difference, especially in the last 2 years, especially after the war began, 22, 23, 24, there is a extreme high percentage of consumption which has increased. Now I remember the percentage was some 1,000% or something like that. The consumption, if the numbers are right, it was around some 88,000 or something like that. The numbers can be found across on the details, but again, Reliance and Naira alone have consumed heavily, and they are exporting the oil. However, for the domestic consumption of the Indians, they didn't get across the consumption of the oil. So in the case of China, China consumed the oil the same way, but then that was purely for the consumption of people. But in the case of India, it was basically exporting it to Europe. And that's where at some point of time, Donald Trump believes, yes.
I just want to add upon, Indian public sectors, mostly they don't export. Indian oil or BPC, HPC are self-sustained in Indian market. Only the balancing refineries like MRPL, CPCL, Naira, they export. Most of the exports are going from these companies only. All the oil which is bought for IOC, BPC or SPC are being sold in India only. Very, very, very small quantity which is being exported. So they don't export at all. Only balancing refineries like MRPL or a CPCL or Naira. Naira, of course, it's a Russian company altogether. They export. And Reliance, one SEZ refinery is completely exporting. So they have to export. No government of India, public sector companies are exporting.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for those views. The point there is about, just to add a layer of it, whatever the war and subsequent sanctions, let's understand that these are not UN approved sanctions. These are individual countries like US and others who are trying to put sanctions, and they want others to comply is also something which is questionable. I think India said a simple thing, whether it is, of course, our big oil industries, giants who are benefiting or what, but India said we need oil and we are getting oil when we would like to do it. With a statement that when Russian President Vladimir Putin had come recently to India for India-Russia summit, he makes a point that US is asking you to stop buying oil. At the same time, even today, US is buying some important minerals, including uranium and other related critical minerals. They haven't stopped buying. What they need, they are buying, but they're telling what we need oil to stop. Is also something to think over, how certain countries could dictate in the name of sanctions, or also something to look at in a way. I'm just talking about the larger restructuring, larger reforms, larger new world order, with the participation of global South countries, including India. How do we democratize? I'll just try to see, I don't know how much time we have further, but very good questions, comments, cross-sharing, all are happening. But I wanted to convey one simple message that what I heard from His Holiness Dalai Lama at some point of time when I was working at Tata Institute, which deeply keeps moving. He said, we live in an age of capitalism, an age where there's a race, competition, all these are there. We need to thrive and participate, no doubt. But he says that what was talked about earlier about the happiness quotient, happiness index, I think that is something for us to reflect. What is essentially happening is in the restless, transforming world order, the individuals are also made to become very restless. So there I would like to carry the message for inner peace, inner calmness. His Holiness Dalai Lama suggested that we need to reflect on bringing in a balance. He even used a word that we need to bring in something called as, it relies on two simple things. One is the empathy and compassion. The empathy and compassion has to come at the inner level, where we need to kind of be calm in this competitive world, not essentially, lose your own health, inner peace in the name of chasing things. The same thing that empathy and compassion is, I think, also needed in the world order, how the nation states would behave. I think empathy and compassion will come and address a lot of issues. But today, what it is happening is that it's all about use of weapons, use of armaments, use of things which are all shattering this thing. I think that's probably a message I wanted to just add on. Besides inner reflection for a country like India or the human beings, the way we are pushed into this fast-paced competitive world, which is also very VUCA world, as I was calling it. In that, we cannot also lose the inner peace. Probably that inner peace will lead to the happiness, and probably we need to be a happy nation, and also to bring in a happiness index at the global level seriously. How well we are doing, not in economic sense, not only lack of war. Even there's a saying that lack of war is actually negative peace. What we need is a positive peace. The positive peace is where everyone thrives, everyone is happy, everyone is participating, and then you can have that positive peace. That is also something very, very important, I feel. I think, end myself here. Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity and this vibrant discussion. Thank you so much to the organizing team.
Thank you very much. Can we have the closing remarks from Mr. Suresh Mariasalam?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Parivelan, on the short notice. You accepted our invitation. You have given a wonderful session. This is a never-ending story. Maybe we can have one more session sometime later, because now we are talking about oil. Once I was working for Indian Rare Earths of BRC, Baba Atomic Center in Bombay. That time, IARC, Indian Rare Earths, which was controlled by BRC, was the only very profitable public sector undertaking. Yeah, I was a consultant with them, and that time I did not realize the importance of minerals. But the more the developments are happening, especially the EV vehicles or electronic vehicles are coming, battery vehicles are coming. Now there is a great demand for minerals, and next to oil, the same story is going to continue for capturing of those countries having large mineral deposits. So this is going to be the next story. So the more developments are happening, the more issues also going to follow that. And we are talking about this Scandinavian country. Dr. Vivek was talking about. I was there. I did my master's and research studies from Copenhagen Central University. And there, the problem, what I understood is there is no kind of status symbol showing things. Here we always think about, when I buy a BMW car, even going to the next street, I will take it and show, see, I have a car, the status. Always trying to show that the status symbol. That they don't. My professor used to come by. Professor Parivelan knows about it. Professor Yip used to come with a bicycle very coolly. One day I remember there was a problem in his toilet, in his office room, and the pipeline got stuck or something like that. The plumber came there. Then he went with him, and then they both were talking, and professor was helping him, taking the spanner, going. All this, they don't realize he is in a higher position, I am in a lower position or something like that. They all equally consider that everybody is important for the country's development. So that kind of mindset, and making the values, to understand the values to the children, because the education in Finland starts at at the age of 7. So the Scandinavian countries, I visited all the Scandinavian countries. I have friends. In fact, we have been discussing about it. In fact, I sent these links also. I don't know whether anybody joined. But very interesting things are happening over that. That's what Dr. Vivek was sharing. So from the points of Dr. Parivelan and Dr. Vivek, the country itself has got some kind of ethics and values and things which we have to take it as a community level. Whereas it's India, country that diversified culture and different things. But at least some parameter can be there where the children are taught with some common values, where suppose say one Indian in North India does something in UK, the entire Indians are like that. That kind of perspective happens. So these are things to be considered, and the global economy is also a big challenge now, where every Indian is also facing some kind of problem. So considering all these things, today's session has given a insight that we have to work in a way that unity and taking the country's policies to the next level. and show the world that India is, a guiding country, having a lot of virtues and values and ethics and things like that. So really, thank you very much, Dr. Parivelan, Dr. Vivek, and Gopi. In fact, Kundan, he also shared sometime back, I think 3-4 months back, he talked about the business perspective in Latin American countries. That also showed how much they are also looking for support of India. I think this session needs one more session, Dr. Ms. Gopi. We can think
Yes,
about next month. We'll invite. In fact, Dr. Parivelan was referring some professors from Pondicherry University. So we'll try to connect them and give the insights and take it to the next level. Thank you very much.
there's one suggestion from Mr. N.S. Murthy. He made a request here. We should have one session on how school kids in Baltic countries are prepared to work in a collaborative way.
I'll be down.
I think we need to have a session on that,
Yeah, we can find out from the network if anybody's
Yes,
any
sir.
is available. We'll try to find out and try to take it. Yeah.
Anil sir, would you like to add anything? Yeah,
Anil
please.
sir.
Sir, when we talk about values, it is a very complex term. So you may talk about emotional value, it is very, very, very subjective. When we talk about Indian, happiness index is very low. But again, I would like to differ on that. So when I have gone to many countries, but I find Indians are, more or less, some strata is there at the top of all the nations. So it is very subjective, emotionally, functionally, even symbolically. We should clearly define what type of value we are talking about. So this is what I want to say. Now India is, progressing very fast in defense also. So slowly India is going to match with other countries at the top 10, even in the happiness index also, I'm very sure. So because Indian education system is also improving. Of course, earlier we had been suffering. Now we are slowly we are inching and we are going to be at the top. Thank you very much.
Right, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for taking your time out on Sunday morning to be with us. Thank you very much for enlightening us with your knowledge.
Hey, Kundan, what's your final?
Yes, Kundan. I think it will be too late for him, sir.
Yeah. Now they will
Must be in a different time zone. Yeah.
Kundan, please. Yeah, go on. Kundan.
Yes. While just to touch upon what in a very thick and thin way, Parivelan touched this, the part of realism, because I'm also a student of Spanish literature and my friend, my colleague, they know it, especially Professor Suresh and Dr. Parivelan, talking about realism in a very sarcastic and very sarcasm way. I will like to, I like to say, and I'm telling this in the forum of where our Indian ambassadors to Latin America and Latin American ambassadors to India, and they are there, ex-ambassadors as well. In fact, one of the very very pioneer of the Indo-Latin American relationship, the ex-ambassador of India to Argentina, Venezuela, and Brazil. And coincidentally, I have worked with Venezuelans as a trade and political advisor to then ambassador of Venezuela to India. So, talking about realism, I think, and we all think who are intertwined with Latin America in terms of diplomacy, semi-diplomacy, business promotion, cultural promotion, linkage, interexchange of, the prospects and the perspective between India and Latin America. It has come to, and I will just go to direct the example, the incident that happened. The Nicolas Maduro, whatever kind of person was he, whatever kind of leadership despotic was he, it was a kidnap, and you can put it in terms of Latin American literature, which is called as magic realism. It is magic and it is realism. It is magic realism, which is being propounded by the famous Garcia Marquez. So just to add value to little bit of my comment to what Dr. Parivelan said, that it was nothing, absolutely nothing, but the kidnap of Nicolas Maduro was under the revisited, not of Monroe doctrine. That is, we will call it Donroe doctrine, was nothing but magic realism that happened in Venezuela. That's all. This is my comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes. Thank you. We are in some of the Venezuelan and Latin American ambassadors, the virtue at Voxen University, where I work. I was just thinking at some point we need to invite you as well to our campus, and it'll be fantastic.
Yes.
We just have had one vice chancellor, in fact, from Venezuela.
Yes.
We look forward to having you, and we'll have some good, interesting.
In fact, Dr. Pari, I suggest a book to be read by our people here in this forum. It is the right opportune time, and the book name of the book is Downsizing America. Downsizing America, written by Dr. Carlos Ramirez. Dr. Carlos Ramirez, who was the husband. He's no more. He passed away in Delhi. He was the husband of my boss, my ambassador, Mrs. Milena Santana Ramirez, the then ambassador of Venezuela to India. So Dr. Carlos Ramirez, he is the author of the book, Downsizing America.
Interesting. We look forward. Whenever you come to India, we look forward to having you here. I think once again, we should thank the organizers and fantastic discussion this has been. Thank you so much.